Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to more Warhammer 40K lore. Where today we are going to talk about the most civilized of Ork clans, the most Imperial, as many other Ork clans would derisively refer to them as, namely the Blood Axes. Despite their rather vicious-sounding name, these are, in fact, as far as orcs go anyways, the most peaceful and cooperative of all greenskin kind. And by that I mean, they will consider trading with you for what they want, rather than simply just hitting you over the head for it. Even though they will still choose option B whenever practicable. This rather weak, spineless, pussified, and decidedly un-orkish approach is also the reason why the Blood Axes have earned themselves a highly negative reputation amongst the other Ork clans, who view them as, at the very best, eccentrics of a yellow persuasion, and at the worst, as just straight-up race traitors. Which does seem rather harsh for just engaging in a little bit of commerce, though the problem does run a little bit deeper than that. So, starting out at the very beginning, as per usual, the Blood Axes were one of the very first Ork tribes to have encountered the Imperium and lived to tell about it, one presumes, way back during the times of the Great Crusade. And ever since, the Blood Axes have existed quite close up against Imperial space. This is already rather unusual, as most Orkish clans would either throw themselves at the Imperium until there were none left, either Orks or Imperials, and certainly never consider coexisting for any extended period of time. But the Blood Axes' curious ability to cohabitate with the Imperium, at least to the point where they're able to exist within a solar system's distance of one another, without it immediately and inevitably descending into mutually assured genocidal warfare, has had many benefits for the Blood Axes, as they've been able to trade for technology that is well above and beyond the usual Ork standard, and because the Blood Axes too have learned quite a few things from their Imperial neighbors. This in fact allowed the Blood Axes to completely dominate Ork society for thousands of years, viewing most of the other major clans as little more than tributary elements of their greater green empire, their Orkpire, if you will. This did not sit particularly well with the other clans, however, that eventually all gathered together to beat the shit out of the Blood Axes, to the point where today, they're more like the scattered, defeated remnants, rather than the power structure they once was, which I suppose in certain ways again mimics their favourite neighbours. But we are getting somewhat ahead of ourselves. What exactly did the Blood Axes do, and how did they come across this somewhat negative reputation of being Hume-loving, traitorous scum? Well, ironically, it is because the Blood Axes are a bit more conciliatory than your average greenskin. In all due likelihood, considering the Ork's origin, etc., as a weapon against the Necrons, the Blood Axes were probably intended to take up some sort of an administrative or leadership role. Perhaps some element of diplomacy, maybe, or some force that would exist within Ork society to ameliorate the countless squabbles and problems that would inevitably arise from gathering a large quantity of orcs in any area for any extended period of time. Diplomats, one might even in fact call them. This allowed them to get along with the Imperium, I was about to say surprisingly well, and yes, surprisingly well by Orc standards, to the point where they were able to engage in sporadic trade with the Imperium. Now, you might be wondering how the hell that worked out as well, seeing as the Ork economy is not exactly directly compatible with that of the Orks, seeing as the primary currency for Orks are, well, teeth. The Imperium doesn't really engage in much teeth trade, now does it? Except when required to. Initially, no doubt, the trade between the two species was simply carried out in kind. The Orks had something that the Imperium wanted, and the Imperium had something the Orks wanted. And so they traded goods and materiel, in all due likelihood for weapons, one would assume, as that would be what the Orks would be mainly interested in. You want 100 crates of lasguns? Okay. In return, we want 100 dead squigs because we're starving, or something along those lines. One imagines that those negotiations must have been, tense and rather interesting, and eventually evolved into outright mercenary contracts that actually went both ways. Obviously, one can see the interest within the Imperium to hire Ork mercenaries to throw at their foe, although, well, this does also bear a certain inherent risk, doesn't it? Orks are not exactly the most trustworthy of allies, and if they are ever given the actual opportunity to betray their employers, they probably would, if for no other reason than because it sounded funny, and it would lead to yet another scrap. On the other hand, however, so long as the humans are actually capable of providing the Orks with what they want most of all, a great big fight, you can kind of see how they might actually tolerate being under human command for a period. Especially if that tolerance will be rewarded with several 100,000 rounds of live ammunition afterwards. There are also examples of human mercenaries fighting for the Orks and alongside the Blood Axes. One would imagine that this is either halfway a pet contract, as Orks actually do tend to be rather fond of humans, or as a ruse to learn from the humans more directly. Unfortunately for the Orks, however, what they consider to be a cunning ruse of the highest order is fairly easy to see through for your average mentally challenged human. And so the Imperium has actually on occasion taken advantage of the Orcs' naivete and childlike innocence to send in infiltrator agents into their midst. There is a particularly fascinating tale about Captain Sebastus Sirong of the Imperial Guard. He and a group of guardsmen dressed up to play the part of disgruntled, disobedient renegades joined up with a Blood Axe war boss by the name of Bogrot. Bogrot was a rather libertarian Ork warlord, even by the standards of the Blood Axes, and employed multiple formations of alien mercenaries, again by Ork standards, within his own horde, including Ogrins, under the command of the freebooter captain Naz Thug. He also employed a second formation of human mercenaries by the name of Nielsen's Raiders. These latter were a group of actual scum and villainy bandits that were from the outer fringes of the Imperium. A band of misfit criminals, in essence, they now operate as advanced scout for Bogrot's army, capable of slipping into and interacting with human society without drawing too much in the way of suspicion, thus locating things like undefended depots or centralizations of weapons, armor, ammunition, and so on that might be of interest to their Orkish warlord boss. Neither of these formations are particularly loyal, but by Ork standards, they're very loyal. In fact, the reason why Bogrot's been able to stay in charge for so long is because he's playing his Ogrins and humans up against his Ork boys, ensuring that no singular faction will ever quite have the power to overthrow him directly. But again, the most interesting aspect of this is Sebastus Sirong, also known by his more orky name of Scumgrod. He has become one of Bogrot's leading advisors and has taught him a tremendous deal about tactics, strategy, and logistics. What Bogrot does not know, however, is that Captain Sebastus is very much still so an Imperial loyalist that has in fact been deliberately sent into his horde in order to turn it away from serious Imperial interests and towards his fellow Orks. A rather crafty little plan, as the Orks think they are learning from the humans, even as the humans turn them around and point them towards their fellow greenskins. Effective though this may all be, however, it is likely to be an exceedingly rare plan on the grand scheme of things, as the Imperium too are rather racist against the Orks, of course. Still, the lessons learned from the Imperium are invaluable, and have allowed the Blood Axes to develop a lot more in the way of actual strategies and tactics. It's not all just deep double-play psyops. They have genuinely figured out how to utilize things like infiltration tactics. Infiltrating enemy lines using specialized formations of shock troopers or commandos, rather than simply massing up all the boys in any given area and sending them rushing towards the heavy bolter emplacements. They will instead send in troops to outflank it, moving around enemy lines, cutting them off for supplies, or simply launching daring ambushes in the middle of night. As the Blood Axes are one of the principal Ork groups that utilize commandos. Orks who have, for one reason or another, developed a love for sneaking, for quiet things and stealthy kills. With the commandoist commando knob of them all, Snickrot, of course, himself also being a Blood Axe commando. And most commandos are also Blood Axes. Not to the point of complete exclusivity, mind you, as other clans have also employed commandos on occasion, but they are rarely overly trusted by the rest of the Orks because, well, they're really weird. And if they're Blood Axes to boot, oh, that's just worse. That is a whole lot worse. But it is obviously to the benefits of the Orks that they can actually reach the enemy without being blown into teeny tiny warging bits, whose only impact on the enemy's lines is a light drizzle of green flesh and black blood. In order to do so, they have developed, as mentioned already, infiltration tactics, along with squad-based warfare, where instead of the usual Ork mobs, they actually have organized formations. Well, to an extent anyways. They might not be operating in strictly defined groups of a certain size, but when a Blood Axe warboss orders a mob to go to a target, he will have a rough idea of how many guys are in that mob. Whereas in the case of most Ork warbands, well, you don't even bother thinking about that because you'll have no idea regardless. They have also developed complex theorems such as covering fire and flanking the enemy. Already, these are rather outlandish ideas as far as the average Ork is concerned, but the Blood Axes have taken it one step further, adapting a truly obscene, abhorrent, heretical, repulsive, and utterly unthinkable tactic in their repertoire: the retreat. That's right. Avert your eyes, young grots everywhere. The Blood Axes will actually, if placed in a situation disadvantageous enough, actively choose to pull back away from the enemy, rather than simply running away whenever their squads have been blown sufficiently to bits. It is a considered decision that they engage in voluntarily, rather than the far more honorable route that most Orks are familiar with. The very fact the Blood Axes even entertain this idea, much less so actively engage in it, is the rough equivalent of the human social faux pas of admitting that you are actually quite fond of the idea of raping baby ghosts to death while slathering yourself in fish eggs and listening to heavy metal music. In public, of course. You see now why the rest of the orcs really just don't like them very much. It isn't just that they are probably fifth columnists within the orc species as a whole, being puppeteered by evil Imperial infiltrators. It's also the fact that they are simply just disgusting creatures that should be punished at every single solitary opportunity. But despite this honest, deliberate, and very much so worthwhile moral condemnation, the Blood Axes have proven to be fairly effective fighters, both utilizing infantry tactics and also larger scale tactics, like armored warfare, utilizing effective armored fighting squads, disembarking from trucks and APCs, who will then stick around to provide covering fire rather than merely racing off. It also includes the utilization of mixed formationed armored elements, with anti-infantry and anti-armor specialists ingrained within larger formations of main battle tanks. They've even gone so far as to develop brand new and specialized pieces of equipment. Certain leaders like Badfrag the Tank Boss, having dedicated much of his life to perfecting various pieces of specialized armor to make his assaulty forces more effective. There was even the occasion where one warlord invaded a forge world and came away from it with a Psi Gargant, where for once, the Gargant itself, already a mobile mountain of guns and metal, was conceivably the least dangerous part, compared to the utterly batshit insane group of weird boys stuck inside of its head, indiscriminately launching bolts of warg energy all about itself. Fortunately, most of the Blood Axe's weaponry are far more conventional than this. They will obviously use the usual orc weapons, which are simply just things that hit other things, e.g. choppers, or things that shoot other things, e.g. shooters. They will supplement this, diverse armory with Imperial pieces, things like specially manufactured lasguns capable of withstanding their far above human strength, or, preferably if they can get a hold of them, large slug-based weaponry. Bolters would of course be the holy grail for any true orc, but those are pretty damn rare, and ammunition for them even more difficult to obtain. Listen, grots are dexterous and industrious creatures, and are only ever made more dexterous and industrious the more you threaten them with excessive quantities of violence, lest they perform better. But they too still have their limits, and mass manufacturing bolt gun ammunition is, in essence, one of those limits. Still, access to Imperial weaponry, especially things like armored vehicles or artillery cannons, are extraordinarily prized amongst the Blood Axes, and they are willing to bargain for them or receive them in return for mercenary service, whatever the Humies want from them, really. Meanwhile, the Humies too have realized the advantages of having big, angry green friends. Now, how exactly to employ them is often the more complicated part, as whilst they will happily work for weaponry, you can see how the average Imperial planetary governor might be a pinch hesitant about handing over tons of heavy artillery to the orcs living on the planet next door. Yeah, That's the kind of stuff that has ended the career of more than one planetary governor in the past, isn't it? And so they would rather find some alternative way of gaining their services. One particularly sneaky way that the Imperium has figured out to do this is to send out explorator teams to Ork-held worlds or areas where the Orks have recently been observed, no doubt scrapping with whatever locals were around at the time, and then finding Ork corpses, bashing their teeth out, and thus obtaining a treasure trove of Ork-ready currency. The Blood Axes don't particularly mind this, because, teeth are teeth. They're valuable no matter where the Humis got them from, whereas other Orks find the practice particularly objectionable on multiple levels. And considering how horrifying the idea of a retreat is to fellow greenskins, it should say quite a lot that they somehow find this act even more repulsive. But oh well. The Blood Axes are plenty used to being the outcasts of Orc society by now, and don't really care anymore what the rest of the Orcs think about them. And to be fair to the Blood Axes, they're not quite as pet level as most Ork clans will have you believe. The Blood Axes genuinely do think that their engagement with the Imperium is specifically to learn from the humans how to best oppose them, how to best fight them, learning their tactics, their strategies, their secrets, the weaknesses and strength of their weaponry, so that they may turn them upon the humans. And I do genuinely believe that the Orks believe this as well, and it certainly has worked out to their benefit on several occasions. One long-standing rivalry, for example, is between the Blood Axes and the Salamanders, with the Blood Axes having been able to pull a one-up over the Salamanders on more than one occasion. Though, granted, they are the weakest sons of the Emperor, so it's hardly that surprising, I guess. But the problem remains that whenever the Orks think that they're outthinking the humans, odds are they're not really. And on the level and average of things, the Orks have probably received the worst end of the bargain, especially when the humans get the Orks to effectively fight one another, as whatever lessons the Blood Axes may have learned about how to defeat the Imperium are primarily occupied with keeping the Blood Axes alive and safe from the wrath of every other clan out there who wishes to beat them to death, simply just to send a message to everybody else. As I imagine, if you can prove that a particularly juicy gathering of freshly extracted teeth come from Blood Axes, that currency probably carries a little bit extra weight on the greenskin international market. Still, the Blood Axes mean well. They really do believe that they are doing this for the betterment of themselves, and thus in turn, of the greenskins in general. And they might be right. And, well, if their subjects weren't constantly trying to smack them over the head, they might be having a lot more success in applying the various lessons learned. For the time being, however, the Blood Axes are pretty much everyone's favorite whipping boy. On the bright side, they've survived so far, so they're clearly resilient, and the Blood Axes are also our best chance at seeing Imperial Orks. Those of you who have been around for sufficiently long periods of time will remember those. And I would like to see Imperial Orks, actually. Until then, however, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I do hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.